Welcome to my third DVD in the series on colorful oil painting. This one features afternoon and late morning light, as well as backlit subjects. Combining the two creates a very exciting forum for me to teach you how to paint and make good color to make those backlit subjects spring to life. The DVD is divided into several parts. In the first part, I'm going to be talking to you about my supplies and about the color time of day wheel that I've designed in order to help you clearly understand what colors to add to your mixtures in order to make a good time of day painting. This is a new feature. It's not in the earlier DVDs. I'll introduce you to two color families, the warm family and the cool family of colors that allow you to make good, logical choices for the colors that you mix. I'm also presenting a slideshow of my work with commentary about backlit subjects, how to really get them established well, and also about sunset and sunrise subjects that are included in this DVD. Of course, there's always outtakes. Let's go and take a look at the supplies and the preparation that I do before beginning my paintings. I keep my paint in these pill boxes, which you've probably seen from previous DVDs or lessons that I have out on video. I love keeping them in the pill boxes because when they go in the freezer, they stay workable for very long periods of time. And it's just so convenient to also keep your colors by their color families, warm and cool. And having the two colors in their separate areas makes it easy for you to make good color choices depending upon whether you're working on the sunlit side of something or on the shadow side of something. I'm going to set them up with my cool family in one, plus the white that I'll be using for the cool mixes, and the warm family plus the white that I'll be using for my warm mixes. I buy my paint, for convenience sake, in caulking tubes from Classic Artist Oils, and they are wonderful paints, very, very buttery, and do not require any medium when you're using them. So you can also get them in the regular size tube called a 4-ounce tube, and that's the smallest size that they can have. And I put the paint in my two bins that are going to be earmarked for my white. You'll notice there's a lot of paint in this bin, and that's because I like to have available to me a lot of paint every time I'm painting. Nothing breaks the concentration that an artist needs to complete a painting than fooling around with the supplies that are used to make those paintings. I am putting my two earth tones in the box next to the white. These are my grayers, and they're also, the burnt sienna is also used for dark orange sunlight mixes, and so it goes in the warm family. I don't put quite as much of these two earth colors in the boxes because they tend to dry out quickly, more so than the other pigments. I have now my two yellows. The warm family yellow is cadmium yellow medium. The cool family yellow is a lemon yellow. This happens to be radiant yellow, which is the equivalent lemon mix for Classic Artist Oils. And I've put in my yellow ochre, which acts as a shadowed orange or a distant orange for mixes. The next color that will go in here is cadmium orange. I now have my warm and cool red in place. The warm red on the top is Cadmium Red Light, and the cool red is alizarin crimson. The last two in the warm family are sap green and phthalo blue. In the cool family, the last two colors that I've added to these pill boxes is phthalo green and ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue is quite full because I do use a lot of it. The last act is to tap the boxes on my palette. What this does is it makes the paint settle down into each of the boxes, and then they will be easier to reach into to get more paint. Takes out any pockets of air that may be found around any of the colors. You'll see now that they're much flatter and they almost look like pans of watercolor. If this is the only DVD that you've purchased, you'll need to learn about my supplies. However, if this is the series, I'm going to go over very quickly on the supplies that I use so that we can get right down to painting. I paint on boards and canvases, and most of the colors you've already been introduced to in the section on when I filled up my boxes. The brushes that I use are usually filberts. They are various and sundry sizes, small, large, medium. Sizes don't really matter, it's how you handle the brush. I find that when I paint, when I really want to be an effective painter with energy and force, I hold my hand as if I'm conducting an orchestra rather than as if I'm writing a letter. Those two differences in hand holdings is the difference between fast and loose and tight and detailed. You might look at how you hold your brushes after you've seen the DVD and make some appropriate changes. The cans that I put my solvent in are nothing more than recyclable vegetable and fruit cans. I like them short and squat, and I fill them with odorless mineral spirits that I keep in a jar. After every day's painting, I pour the odorless mineral spirits back into the jar, and then the next day, 24 hours or less, I can pour perfectly clear liquid back into my painting cans, and then I have clear liquid. The gunkies settle down to the bottom, and they're in the bottom here. I leave this out exposed to air for a couple of weeks when it has about an inch of stuff in the bottom, and then I take the entire container to my recycle for hazardous wastes. On those days they accept those things. Paints are usually placed, cool colors over here, warm colors away from me, so that I know when I'm dealing with shadows I use this batch of colors, and when I'm using my sunlit areas of my painting I shift over to this box. It's really neat to do it that way because it's almost mindless painting, and I lost my mind a long time ago, so I really enjoy mindless painting. Getting rid of the white of that canvas. That's a pretty color anyway. I use odorless mineral spirits to thin down the paint. I don't want it thick at this point. No more white canvas. This is also a good opportunity to show you how I clean my palette. I have this little pile, this little mess here, and what I do is I will take a paper towel and my scraper, plain old ordinary glass scraper, you can buy it at any hardware store, and I will scrape and wipe, scrape and wipe, scrape and wipe, and then the palette is clean back to the glass. Underneath the glass is a piece of wood that's painted gray, a value 5 gray. Again, for the same purpose that I did this toning on this palette is the same reason I get rid of the white on this canvas. The reason is so I can mix better color. Wiping off the excess so it won't profoundly affect any of the colors I put on top. You can spend the day in your studio staining canvases this way. When you don't feel like painting, at least you're going to have a surface ready for you when you're ready to paint. Now, I do a painting a day. For that reason, I always have to have a canvas ready. Sometimes I can do it this quickly. Other times I just come in here late at night when there's nothing else going on and I get out some old paint and start getting rid of the white on all those little canvases that are featured on my daily painting site. Now it's time to show you how I paint a late morning light backlit subject. What I'll be painting today, showing you afternoon light, will be a subject matter that's very dear to my heart. It's a dog that I used to own. It's a picture of my beloved Doberman on the front porch of my old house. Now, working from my photograph, I've placed a sketch onto the 12 by 16 canvas that I'll be using for the demonstration, and I have definitely modified the composition. The reason I've modified the composition is it is very rare that a photograph is going to give you exactly the perfect balance of values, of shapes, of objects within the composition. So, although my original photograph has 2 dogs in it, I have eliminated the second dog and only focusing on a circular feeling within this composition. You have to think about design before you begin painting, but that could be an entirely new video. This drawing was done with just plain straight burnt umber, thinned with a lot of the odorless mineral spirits that I use for cleaning my brushes. The first thing that I do when I work on my canvases is I usually cover the entire canvas with the essential color for the area that is going to be painted. In talking about the colors, you know that the afternoon shadows are a little muddier than morning shadows, and as I start to paint it, well, we'll just have to wait and see. Picking up a brush, this happens to be the number 4 silver brush, filbert. I'm going to lay in some of my larger areas on my shadows, getting my darks in right away, because number one, the dark pigments, both ultramarine and especially burnt umber, dry really fast. So I'm going to lay in my darks on my dog. What I do very quickly is I just lay in the darks. Notice I changed how I hold my brush. That's important. I'm trying to fill in the space. Let's move it with an even bigger brush, about a 5/8 inch filbert, and do some background color. Now, Afternoon Light has in it a lot of green shadowing, so everything that's in shadow back in here is going to be touched by green. It's also going to be blue. So no matter what happens, I start out with a blue-green mix. I can add to it, as this is my influence color. This blue-green, which was made with ultramarine blue and a touch of phthalo, both shadow colors, makes a nice blue-green. Now that is not the straight shadow color, it's way too powerful. What I'm going to do is compromise that blue-green by adding all kinds of other stuff to it. So I'll add some yellow and some of my cool white. But notice I picked up some of the blue-green here, so that I will be, no matter the fact that it has my cool orange, which is yellow ochre, in it, it will still have blue-green in it to be a shadow color. And here we go right across the back. Oop, too much shadow color. You want to maintain the vitality of the contrast between the dark of the background and the actual dog itself. Now, I don't care so much about edges at this time. Edges are not important for me until later when I start cleaning this up and finishing it. Now, the variations in color that happen here become absolutely gorgeous because I'm not dipping straight from my color anywhere. Over here, none of this stuff is coming out and going straight up to the canvas. Remember what I said about neutral values, gray values in nature? But the knowledge is here. It's a shadow, ergo it has blue-green in it, because it's an afternoon or an early, late morning painting. That little puddle right there will influence all of my shadows in this painting. Sunlight, we move over to the orange. You know that we're going to touch everything with the orange, but when I first start painting, my whole process is to start with the shadows, build a beautiful area all over the canvas, and then tweak it and make all of the rest of it start to sing. Now, as I mix up other colors and move away from my shadows, my shadow pile, I go back in and get some of it and touch it over to, and touch it, pick up some of that blue-green and put it in my mix. You see? It's related, and that there is the whole message about color harmony that makes a painting powerful. When you mix up different colors, you pick up, look at, I wish I could show this to you, even digitally it won't show you as good as it could be, the beauty that happens with these beautiful subtle gray colors. Now I'm going to go towards a more green mix for distant bushes back in here. Again, the color harmony will continue to sing. Don't get it too dark, because the foreground greens are the ones that are really going to be dark. It's creating interesting vegetation. Continuing to cover the back of the background above the dog. Actually, these are distant sheds. But the gorgeous veil of color that's crossing the top of this canvas. Let me zoom in. Have you go across there and pan across there. You see the subtle variations of color that are coming alive. Oh, he's got a Roman nose. Now I'm going to zoom back out and continue. I can have a lot of fun with my cool palette, mixing up an infinite variety of colors down here. The distance shadowed street, a little lighter because it's got a plane that's flat, but it still has a very nice influence of that blue-green light that's characteristic of late morning, early afternoon scenarios. That's a dark value, that's a middle value. We're going to have our lights when the dog shows up in the finished detail area. Now as we move back down towards, again, that blue-green shadow, Lots more green because these are green bushes. But I mix it in with, I have both burnt umber and some of the compromised colors from my palette in this area so that it'll really show up. Scrubbing in the colors. And right here by the dog is a spark of, oh, that's a beautiful, beautiful turquoise green. And it shows up because I want to play off the sunlit side of the dog here. Some more bushes back out here. I don't want them to be as strong as these bushes. They're further away, so the brush marks are softer. They're softer edged. This is yellow, so it'll be fun to paint that with yellow ochre and tinge it with a little touch of the green. Not much. The color of the pot is yellow. However, because of the time of day, the pot is yellow. I add a touch of the blue-green to it, which compromises it and grays it down, but it still reads as a yellow pot in shadow. So let's get a brown pot. Again, it's a shadowed pot, so I stay away from those colors over there. Shadows are over here. So the shadowed pot has the burnt umber in it. It has red in it, and it has the yellow in it, so it looks like it's a brown pot. A touch of that blue-green, just a touch, just a whisper. It keeps us honest. Keeps all the shadow areas reading right. I always start with my shadow sides in virtually every composition that I work on. When I do the lights, all of these gorgeous subtle colors will play up well against it. I've got a couple of areas up here, one of which is quite blue. However, I'm going to make it blue-green because it's in shadow. It's the edge of a building that's a little further away. And I have an area that's actually almost in sunlight, and there I add a touch of orange. I mean a touch, just a whisper, because it's far away. Orange is not a very powerful color. Far away, there. See, those are the roofs of those distant sheds. Creates a nice geometry that's here. Plus I have the dark of the rust on the shed roofs. I'll add just a little bit of that, just to break up that shape I'd painted in there. Let's just mix together everything that we got. Right on our palette. Oh, that's a pretty color. It's about the right color for a blue-green shadow. Sometimes your best mixes come when you don't plan on them. So we'll just scrub this in and cover up and make our shadow shapes. You have to design with your shadows in mind. Because if you don't design with your shadows in mind, you're going to end up with bad composition. And bad composition generally comes because they don't think about their shadow shapes. And then we've pretty well wired it for our next step, which is to paint the lights. The neat thing about the system is if you have to remix a color, you can do it. Because you know where it came from. It's a shadow, it's these guys. You can fool around and you can get the color that you need. You can do it easily if you have the knowledge of which box it came out of. Okay, moving right over to sunlit sides of things. We go into our warm box. This box now is sort of pushed away. I'm going to mix my warm colors over here to kind of keep them separate from my shadows, but I may need these colors later, so I don't clean my palette. Into my warm white. And now I'm going to mix up some warm colors for those sunlights. Now, is there blue-green in the sunlight? No. Remember the color circle. In the sunshine area, you need to keep it light in value, and you need to add some orange to it, or yellow, or red, or burnt sienna. If it's in the sunlight and is warm, because that's a foil against which a lot of this composition is working. I'm going to get down here. Edge control is not of major concern to me. Getting the accuracy of the color is. And it's still warm in the sunlight. Here comes the cat. Oh dear. The rug has a little bit of yellow in it, so I'm going to add a little yellow to my mix. A little burnt sienna. Cat's going to be a problem. I know it. I just knows it. Then I'm going to take some green, mix it into that, add some yellow, and a little bit of orange, sunlit green things. Because they're in the sunshine, they go warm. The value difference is not much because that's not an area of major interest. When I get over towards my interest area, the focal in the center portion of my canvas, I'll add more light to my color, lighten it up considerably, still staying with my warm palette, add more yellow as well, and then when I paint these bushes out here, they will read better. More yellow, yet light. Oh, I like a lot of paint. Can you tell? Rolling my brush around so I don't have to clean it as often. And that's how we paint. The distant road out here. Now I added a touch of ultramarine blue to that mix because it's further away, and time and distance, it's in sunlight, but a touch of ultramarine blue makes it lay down so it looks like it's further away. Just a touch cooler than the mix that's used for the porch and the porch stairs. See, this dark shape is my darkest dark at this time. Notice how I'm holding my brush now. These are tight details. Tight details need a tighter brush. Going to get some more red into the sunlit red into the carpet that's on this porch. Create the fringe. Create the fringe in the shadow. I move into burnt umber. I'm making sure I hold my structure strong. Tight details, loose painting. Noon light, anything that's in shadow is powerfully influenced by blue-green. And there's a really neat thing. I'm going to do it now. Blue-green with the yellow in it, creating a lighter side to this pot. It really does tell you, gives me the golly wobbles. And then some more yellow, and take in this side of the pot. Ooh, yeah. Now it's round. Whee! Still using my shadow colors. I'm just having a field day painting the shape of this pot. The details are going to be here to make this dog really pop out. Yeah, he's popping now because she's really, really black. There'll be some dark areas, and if I need black, I mix my alizarin with my phthalo green and I get a perfectly black. If I ever need one, boom. If I go towards the greener side, it ends up being quite a nice dark black for making the deepest of deep shadows in that pot right there. Making a really, really nice edge to these guys. If you want the viewer's eye to go anywhere, make contrast. My cool orange with a touch of alizarin creates the shadowed side of the rust on the dog's markings. I could not use my sunlit colors for this because it wouldn't read right. Edges are not important here. They may be important when I do my second pass, but for now, all I want to do at this time is to create a nice feel so it reads as a dog sitting on a porch, which it seems to be doing. But again, the idea is that every shadow area that you paint in any kind of late morning or early afternoon kind of time of day, you want to influence those areas with a decided touch of your blue-green. We've now covered the canvas with the basic colors that are going to be found in every area of the painting. This is where we start controlling edges. This is where we start adding the details, and we start establishing the hierarchy of edges. What edge is most important, plus the subordination of other edges. In this case, with a backlit subject, our highest contrast will be where we have our highlights against a dark value. Backlit subjects work extremely well when you're dealing with a contrast of values. Here's the rule, and it's a good one. If you want to do a backlit subject, backlighting is established by middle values against a strong light and a strong dark. So if you have your middle range of values in this area of your painting, and your focal point has the strongest light and the strongest dark adjacent to each other, you'll have a powerful setup for a backlit painting. Remember, predominantly middle values, and in your focal areas you have your highest contrast of dark and your highest contrast of light. My colors have come out of the freezer again. Hello, colors. Welcome to the warm studio. I usually wrap them in a plastic bag so that they are additionally sealed against anything in the freezer. The plastic bag protects them. So double wrapping them with both the pillbox covers and the plastic bag really helps them to stay moist and easy to work with. One of the things I recommend for students is always put out about 3 times the amount of paint you want to use and then use it, because you'll find that 50 cents worth of paint is a cheap price to pay when your interruption is minimized when you're actually making your work. What I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to work on embellishing everything, and then finally coming up to my focal point to put in those last little bits of highlights. And they will be the strongest ones. That's the neat part about this. I'm working with a number 4 filbert. I'm bringing in some warm sunlit roses. Now, of course, backlit subjects, you use your sunlight colors for any area that's actually in sunlight. And you use your cool palette if it's in the shadow. So here I am in the sunlit area, and I'm in my warm side, painting the flowers that are actually in the sunshine. Additional darks that I need to put in. Remember another concept about a 45-degree angle. Keep your cools on this part and keep your warm mixes over there, and you won't get lost as you're mixing up your color mixes. Since I have decided that this is a late morning, not an early afternoon painting, I'm going to punch up some of the shadows in these areas so that they will read more as blue-green. And of course my blue-green color, as you know from my earliest mixing, was a combination of ultramarine blue and phthalo green, used as a mother color for the shadows that I mix up. And I'm just going to use more of it to influence my shadows as I go across under the dog. It'll end up being purer and more blue-green. So it'll read more as late morning with the blue-green in the shadows. Let's do a close-up. Zip. Okay, that means I have to work here. Okay. Oops, gotta get over here where the close-ups are going to be. Rotating my brush, turning my brush around, creating more interesting edges. Yeah, there you go. A little more blue-green in the background. See, I'm changing the color that's actually in the photograph. The photograph, as you've seen, is really quite boring. So by punching up the color because of thinking about it in my head, then I've got the chance to make a much more colorful rendition of what nature puts in front of us. A camera just does not do the job. It really is only a beginning starting point for anything that you want to create. It really isn't the solution for making good paintings. It's a good beginning, but by golly, you can make a far better painting. That's a lovely blue-green shadow behind that dog. Now as it moves on to the carpet, which is more of a sienna color, I have to compromise it. I can't leave it as blue-green or it won't read right. But I can sure put it over here. And it just reads as a later morning now. Had I left the painting alone, as you saw it at the beginning of this session, it would have been an afternoon painting with afternoon light, and the shadows would have been muddier. I love morning light for the clear, beautiful color that it'll give you at every stage of the game. It really is nice. You know, at this point, there isn't too much you get to do to it that's going to make it a better painting. There are small details, accuracy in the essence of what the dog is, ears. Remember what I told you about being able to remix a color if you make a mistake? Well, I'm going to have to remix some of that green back there because the ear was placed a little too far forward. And so I have to repaint it, and since I have to repaint it, I also have to remix some of the background color. Now the background color was made with which palette? Warm or cool? Yes, it was made with the cool palette because it's in shadow and it's also at distance. So to remix it, I have immediately eliminated 6 colors over here. I don't even get to use them to try to make a similar color. I have to go to my cool palette because I know that logically, if it's in distance, if it's in shadow, it's my 6 colors that are on this side of the palette. So here we go. It's got to have some green in it, it's got to have some blue in it because it's time of day, and then I just have to add some of those cool yellows and the cool orange, a little touch of the burnt umber to bring it down in value. And let's see if I got it. Now, is that ever a good feeling? Does that ever make you feel like an artist? How many times have you struggled saying, oh, I'll never be able to make that color again? With this system, knowing that you have 2 palettes to work from, warm and cool, you're going to get it. Okay, working on the dog now is our focal point. The rest of the painting is pretty well taken care of itself. And now, all of the light sides in this dog have to be dealt with my warm palette, of course. But there's an interesting thing when you have black in sunlight, it turns blue. It's shiny and it's pretty. Now, I can't use my shadow blue. Ultramarine belongs to the shadows. So in order to do the lights on the dog, I get to dip into my phthalo blue. I can gray it down a little bit with a touch of cad orange so it won't scream blue. And I can add white to it to lighten it up. Not the lightest lights, because that we wait for that towards the last. But that blue reads right as the color that belongs on the sunlit side of that dog. She's looking back over her shoulder, which is a very pretty thing. There's a light around the perimeter of her ear. And that has to be lighter and even warmer because if it's the brown part of her ear showing, I got to go to the cad orange and white. And I want it real light because, again, a backlit subject, you got that contrast. Got your middle values here, and you have your darkest darks, and then you have your highlight area, which tends to be the area where the greatest light takes place. I can see I'll have to bring the background up to her nose. Where's that nice green I made? Now the end of her nose has that blue white on it. Not the orangey white, but the blue white. Now as I get down lower on this canvas, my contrast is not going to be as great. My colors are not going to be as pure. Because I don't want your eye to go there as much as I want it to go there, so my contrast is lower. My colors are less pure. And we end up making a decent picture of a dog in sunshine. With the light on her coat. My heart is in my painting. I go back and forth in my edges between the background and the actual object I'm painting. I find the edge. See, I painted that blue and now I'm coming back in with that background color that I mixed up in order to find it again. Still have the blue-green in the shadows, albeit different. Now what did you learn? I always ask my students that. Okay, lesson's over. Tell me what you learned so you can go home. Well, let me tell you what I think you should have learned. Backlighting is not difficult if you remember that values need to be strongly contrasted against a middle value. You have darks, light, middle value. And also when you painting featuring late morning or early afternoon light, you've got to watch to make sure that your shadows reflect a good portion of blue-green. Then they will read right. And always paint things you love so that there's a story in it. Your heart will come through in your paintings if you're painting things that have meaning for you. I'm just adding some cool orange to show a reflected light off the wall that's actually over here on my porch. Wow, I think I nailed it. Oh, by George, I think she's got it. And that becomes a nice finished painting. Finished as it's going to get. You see, the second pass on a painting is not about painting the big shapes. It's about just doing the little details so the painting sparkles when a viewer comes up and takes a look at it. That's what that's all about. I tell you, I just love to paint. I sign my paintings with a contrasting value, but not necessarily a contrasting color. Since I'll be signing in the shadow area of the dog, I used my cool palette. Then I have a brush load of paint. And I usually go back and get another fistful of paint for the brush that comes off my pseudo palette down there. And that's how I sign my paintings. The second painting in this DVD is a beautiful sunrise painting with a cowboy who's getting on a horse, just getting ready to get off to go do his morning work. It's a moment caught in time, and throughout the painting session I will again explain to you why I use the colors that I use and where I use them. Please be sure to take some good notes. No, there's not a test at the end. I've got a lot of nice photographs here, but none of them are really great for making a good painting of a sunrise or sunset scene. And the neat thing about it is if you do get a picture of a sunrise or a sunset, you can always change it and make it the other way if you don't like it. For example, this is a sunset with all the orange in it, and this is a sunrise with all of the yellow light in it. And you can make these choices based upon the color system, not based upon your source material. And that, of course, makes you a better artist because then you end up making choices based upon your mind, not based upon the limits of a photograph that you use for reference. You can watch me work from my photograph. A good ability to draw certainly doesn't hurt. Now the sun is going to be coming up here, all of our backlit, and so we've got to have some sort of a mountain back here to give us some interesting color and some distant land also to do the same. And the second rider I'm going to put over here. When in doubt, wipe it out. Yeehaw! Hey, even the pros make bad mistakes. With the sun right about there, that's going to be a nice little painting. Let's see, the horse's head's a little lower on this photograph. Oh, another mistake. Point it out, grab a paper towel, a little mineral spirits, and wipe it out. Better to make 100 corrections than to draw it wrong once. Spoken like a true person who's made about 1,000 corrections. That's working. Notice how many corrections I've made. Drawing is about finding, which, given that the sun is there, shadow is going to be this direction. Backlit subjects always have the shadows on the front side. If the sun's over here, the backlit subject will have a lot of rim light in this area, meaning this will be beautifully illuminated with a lot of the warm colors. And then as we move away from our source of illumination, what's going to happen is we're going to move right off into our cool palette. I'm going to put a ring about 4 inches. All the warms will be in here. Everything else, unless it's hit by sunlight down here, backs of the sources, legs, and so forth, will be cool. Anything that's not directly in that sun ring or directly illuminated, anything that is in that ring or is in the sunlight will be your warm family of colors. Anything that is outside of that will be your cool family. Now, the only difference between a morning painting and a sunset painting, backlighting, is the intensity of the color. If you have a morning painting, everything's going to be affected by cool yellow all the way around, all throughout the shadows. The entire sky will have some vestige of cool yellow in it. That's a sunrise painting. If you're dealing with a sunset painting, you change over, as I showed you in that wheel, where you move right over into the orange, and you've got a tremendous amount of orange and straight cad yellow in this area. And then when you move out into the other areas of the painting, anything that's in sunlight is powerfully affected by the color orange. Let's go ahead and lay in our large shapes on this painting so that you can see how this one develops again. Now, this painting is all about value, just as the previous one was. Both of the paintings in this DVD are backlit subjects. Painting a sunrise is again the drama of this little location right here against the subordination of everything else that happens on the periphery. The first thing I'm going to do again is lay in my darks so that I have a clear place against which all of my other colors will play. Is you can lay in an awful lot of dark without breaking out of the design. None of this part that's going to be backlit has much detail in it. For this, all I want to do is get in my big shapes so that you and I and the viewer will recognize that, oh, we got a backlit subject going on here. See how easy it is to paint horses? Just color inside the lines. Connect the dots. Now, see, there's the dark structure already in place, and it's very, very workable. Now, think, what's the cool color for blue? Yes, ultramarine. So I jump into my ultramarine and I come in and I paint that man's kneecap. And I come in and I paint ultramarine into his jeans that are below the yellow slicker. Neat thing about that is that blue complements the cool orange that's going to go here for that slicker. Why not cool yellow? Because it's in shadow. It reads right if it's cooler, making it cool yellow. You see, my cool yellow is a lot lighter than the cool orange in value. Yes, I can mix some in where I want to create the illusion of a different shape. But in general, what I need to do for this is to make it dark because it's behind the horse and not illuminated. It reads right when you follow the color system. Boy, does it read right. And I can't emphasize for you how important that is. We go out the arms the same way, just paint the color that you know it has to be. It's cool, so of course it's going to be, oops, got a little too much red in there. It's cool, it's going to be the yellow, and as we come up higher we might get some influence off the sun bouncing off the sky, so I did add a little bit of the cool red to it. Just as I'm painting it, I just add some of my white from my cool bin to differentiate the shape, because we do need to have the shape of the guy. He's actually a human being, and he does have anatomy underneath there. I don't want to have too great a value change on this slicker because otherwise it won't read right. It'll read as something that's being illuminated by a light source other than that sunlight that's back here. Yellow ochre and burnt umber will be plenty, all we'll need to do both his face and his hat. And the crown of his hat. That's all we need right now. Just to have something in place so it looks like there's a guy getting on a horse. And it doesn't look very pretty yet. Trust me, it will. Now, to do this actual sky, what we have to do is get all of the color laid in and then come back in on the second pass and make it beautiful, more beautiful. Now, I've got some clouds back here that I'm going to kind of use for material for this, and I'm going to shift over to a larger brush, a little bit larger. This is a 1/2 inch filbert. And I'm going to dip right deep into my white and my blue. Now, since this is morning, what's the color I need to add? You got it, cool yellow. So as I paint my sky, I'm going to make sure that I have a lot of the cool yellow in my mix. Down here it goes to blue-green. By the addition of that cool yellow again. We are staying so completely in our cool palette. Oh, now, remember that circle I told you about? As these cool colors come towards that circle, they're going to fade out. They're going to go to the warm colors. It doesn't matter what your subject matter is for any of these kinds of paintings. You could backlit a boat on water, you can backlit a cityscape, you can backlight and do a sunrise, sunset backlighting of any kind on virtually any subject. Now again, as we move towards the middle, we get more of that cool yellow in there as a morning sky. It gets very, very pretty, almost electric looking. And where I'm going to be putting in my clouds, I go back to my colors and I mix up my 3 primaries, in this case yellow ochre instead of yellow, blue, but wait, that's just way too dark. So what I do is I go in and I get my white and I come in on the edge of it and I check the color. Too red. So I add blue. Notice how much mixing is actually going on down here on the palette. And I compare it to what I have over here and I say, okay, is that going to work for a balanced color against this blue-green that I've got over here? Let's test it out and see. Well, it's pretty good, except it's way too dark. Interestingly, when you photograph pictures and bring them out of your camera, you'll find that the clouds are generally way too dark. What you need to do, especially in morning clouds, is to paint clouds that are darker than your sky, but not by much. Now as we come in towards the middle, of course, things change, and that's why I drew that circle there, so I would always be mindful of how that color palette is going to change when I get up near that middle portion. And then as you get down underneath your clouds, you might want to go more towards the red and the alizarin and the yellow ochre in your cloud mixes. And then and of course they are a mixture of 3 primaries. There's still blue in there, so they still read right, but they're just a variation of color from one gray to another almost, and because of that they just read right. And boy, is it ever all about reading right. Boy, you hear me say that over and over again, but it's become the mantra. If you really want a good painting, you want it to read right to the viewer, and making it read right is the key to having a successful day painting. Now I'm going to go ahead and go back out to a lighter color. Still, all 3 of it was made with a cool palette, so the lighter color will read as I move down into that yellow-green, pardon me. It's okay, Elin. And I take my colors out into that circle, but they get thinner as I move out into the circle because I'm going to add warm colors to unify it and bind it and make it all hang together. Ooh, way too dark. And there we go. Now as I move down to the lower portion, I get a little bluer in my mountains. Distant mountains get blue. They're blue out here, and they change over to the reflected light that's happening. That's that evening sky that's still going away. Remember what I said about the hierarchy of edges? As you move away from your center of interest, you want those hierarchy of edges to disappear, to dissipate, to be less important. Cowboy standing next to his horse, high noon, we're talking impossible. But what you do is you just paint what you need, and it doesn't have to be much, because in this picture it isn't about much. It's just about having a second figure to bring you up. Now he's off the edge of the mountain. Mountain is right about here. Horse and rider. Let's work on the middle ground. The middle ground is influenced by the sky and distance, so it tends to be a little bit like the sky colors, but a little influenced by the dust in the air. Yeah, not much dust, but some. So what we need to do is put in a color that's really pretty. Away from our sunlit area, we're going to go with this lovely mauve, purple, and also let it powerfully be influenced by that morning light that's streaming across. When we're out near the periphery, we're going to stay with our cool palette. Yeah, I got the gap. The whole idea at this point is just to cover the canvas. Everything fixable gets fixed later. Gray it down. Just mix up everything that's on your palette and create a good neutral gray. And it will work. Alizarin's your most powerful color. Your yellow ochre is your weakest, so you can always put in a lot more yellow ochre in your mixes to gray things down. Now as distance increases, values decrease, so as I go ahead and go back towards the back here, I'm going to go ahead and lighten it up by the addition of white so it more closely matches the value that's in those mountains. Again, staying away from my warm circle that I have that's going to be coming in this area. And even though the edges are not important at this time, the values are. We want to be really certain that we get our values in place and get them right, because we can always come back in later and fix things and make them even more pretty. If you don't get the values correct and you don't get the using your cool palette or your warm palette, if you don't get those colors laid in on the first get-go, you've got all kinds of fixing to do at another time, and who wants to do that? Light areas, guess what? We're going to move to our warm palette. Green, influenced by the cool yellow of morning. Also influenced by a little bit of burnt sienna to gray it down. Yeah. And then we have a color that'll work as the underpainting area for our what he's standing on. Let's go ahead and paint in the warm palette now and finish up this area of the canvas with the generalized colors that we're going to be using. Notice I dipped into the white rather than the cool white over here, because this one has only been mixed with warm colors, so there's absolutely no temperature compromise. As I move over towards sunshine in the morning light, I slip into my cadmium yellow and just use that with the white in the areas that's lit by the sun. This is also the color that we use, the cadmium yellow and white, is also the color that we use to highlight underneath the clouds to really make them look like they're lit from the sun that's just come up. We can take it outside our circle because it does affect clouds that are further away. Now as I move away, I'm going to add just a touch of the hot blue, and I mean a touch because phthalo screams. It's a very powerful color, but I'm still into my warm palette in the morning light. And the temperature difference is palpable. You can actually feel the difference by the use of the hot blue instead of the cool blue to make that transition over to the other side of the palette. Now, warm down in here transfers over to our warm palette of a little bit of the yellow, a little bit of the cadmium orange, a lot of white, and a touch of burnt sienna. Then we have our color for our mountain. Sunlit area of the edge of our mountain. Now that will transfer over as it moves away. It will transfer over into that cool blue. See how we've just lay that color in there, one brush stroke. If you use more than one, you're going to end up messing it up. There we go. I paint more horse legs by painting what's around them. Now coming back in and using some of my cools, I'm going to texture up this, get that horse back to looking like a horse's leg here. A little smaller brush, not much. This one happens to be a 3/8 inch. And what I need to do is really punch up the edge of the horse with some color that indicates that the light is on him. So I warm him up with some red, and then I move out to yellow and orange as I get out towards the edge of the actual horse. And then what I'll do is I'll go and fix that at the second go pass so it really does read right. Right now it's just reading that it's lit from behind, which is what I want. And it's done with the warms. I do want to get the sun in, so I just go ahead and slap him in there. Boom. That's the morning sun. Around the sun we paint in a definitive color with a lot of white, touch of orange, so that it's darker in value than its sun itself, but still quite warm. The dark value sets the sun off and makes it really read as the sun actually rising behind him. Now that sun is cool because white is your ice cold color. But what we do to really make it pop is we take a clean brush and we dip into our clean, cool green and with white, and we flash a little bit of the other color, the opposite, into the sun. And if you ever look into the sun, you'll see that flash of phthalo green in there. It makes your eyes hurt. And so by putting that in the sun that we've got there, it makes it even more brilliant than it really is. Now I'm going to add a little more color to the back of the horse, and then I'm going to zoom in on it for you. This is a yellow slicker in sunshine. So the brightest yellow I've got goes on the back side of the yellow slicker where he's going to have it in sunlight. And where it isn't, of course, it goes right back into the cool orange. There. I needed to show you that much so that I can zoom in on it before we take a break. After doing the major painting in the first pass and getting the canvas completely covered with the correct color for the time of day we're depicting, now we come back and we do the details that allow us to punch up our focal point and make the painting a visual delight as your eye traverses over all parts of it. Our warm palette again, our cool palette, divided by a line down the middle so that our warm mixtures stay over here and our cool mixtures stay over here. Picking up that good old number 4 filbert. To finish up, I'm going to go ahead and start putting in details. Truly backlit subjects, when the illumination is coming directly behind, have to be handled a little differently than the backlit subject we did for the dog painting earlier. That backlit subject did not have the sun right there, so that does create a little bit of a challenge. Instead of a middle value surrounded by the lightest light and the darkest dark, what we have is the lightest value surrounded by a very intense color band, and then we move into the darker shadow areas to indicate what's going on. Let's do some cloud softening here. By leaving a crisp edge on the bottom edge of the clouds and softening and gently mixing that which is in the cloud itself, you create a more believable cloud to the viewer. And it's like finger painting. I'm right-handed, so I'm even doing this with my non-dominant hand. And so it creates a more natural effect. Clouds tend to be full of moisture and not a lot of hard edges, so the more softening you do, the better. Just makes it read right. Besides which, I don't want it competing with all these hard edges here. And now you see this really does come out and vibrate a lot more. I'm going to do the sunlit grass in the foreground. Go into my warm palette here. Add a touch of the orange to it, just to keep it right. And I add some white. White will cool off your colors, but since this is grass, it has to be lighter. Most of the colors in the West are lighter and grayer than we have them, than the colors that come out of our tube. Now as I move away from the sun, I'm going to add some of my cool orange, that's the yellow ochre, to my mix. Notice how I moved over in my palette from my strictly warm stuff. Now I'm getting into combinations. So I'm going to go ahead and put that pigment more towards the cool side of my palette. Get it out here on the perimeter where it's not quite as important. That's another way you can subordinate your palette. Is you can, as you move away from your area that's of interest, you move out of your pure mixes of either warm and cool to a combination. It also just helps the viewer to believe it even more. Now I have to put some lights on this fellow back over here because he's not very believable in shadow. Because he's far enough away that he's going to have some blue in him due to distance, and that definitely toned down the orange mix that I'm making over here. Now I'm going to add some burnt umber and yellow ochre to this horse so you can see him better. What color will I make the horse blankets? How about turquoise blue? Yeah. There we go. Now that was phthalo green and white, and it shows up as a cool turquoise in the shade, and it really works pretty well. Slightly smaller brush. Yellow ochre on the back side of his hat, showing some light. Now, when you do the lights on a backlit subject, again, the contrast of middle values works well here because we're far away from the sun. So when I do the background contrast of the light hitting the backside of the horse's legs, I'm going to think about what color the horse is. He's black-legged. So I'm going to come in with my blue, and yet I'm going to tone it with some of the orange, and to make a gray blue, and lighten it up considerably. Both warm colors, phthalo blue and orange, so it will read as warm even though it's a gray. Don't want to be in the camera, so I'll zoom. Now as it moves up towards the red part of the leg, I have to change from the blue-white to a different color. But for the lower part of the legs, this warm mix of phthalo blue and cadmium orange plus white will make a lovely blue color that will work extremely well on the back sides of the legs. And as we move up higher, then we go over more towards the orange because it's a brownish red horse. Use burnt sienna and also that white to lighten it up. And we go straight away from a blue to an orange for the highlight on the back of the leg right there. I want to give the feeling of motion, so I make a loose edge here that's not as tight. Anytime you want motion on any kind of subject matter that you paint, just make the edges disappear. All I'm doing now is taking the basic color that I put underneath and embellishing it with values that are close and colors that are nearby so that each area that you look at looks more interesting than it did before this painting time. Now it's time to work. Yellow, orange, and then to red. And finally in the reflected area it's going to come into yellow ochre, the cool orange. And there you've got a lit rear end. Backlit subjects have a rim light, putting the light in before I actually paint the dark part of the tail. Now, the dark part of the tail goes to burnt sienna and also to the oranges as the sunlight comes through it. That kind of makes a neat color. And then we do the edge of the hat. The lightest light we can pick up without getting pure white. See, backlighting is made by having a radius of light radiating from the source of illumination. The lightest light on the side where that sun is hitting. Now, that same kind of light has to be on the clouds because they're being illuminated by the same type of heat. So we've got to put in the light underneath there. And of course we get to use an awful lot of good color. Okay, now that we're working towards this area in the middle ground needs some more texture and interest. I'm going to pick up some yellow ochre and a little bit of burnt umber to put in some shadowy bushes out here. And a couple of changes to make to the tack so it's visible. Picking up my cool colors. Give them a breast collar for the saddle. If you don't draw them right, they don't read right to the viewer. You gotta put a bridle on him. And we've got some reins that are going to be coming up. Got one of them in on the far side, but I don't have one on this side. Notice I hold my brush as if I'm writing. This is where your details matter. So you start tightening down your hand on the brush, and it's more as if you are writing a letter rather than scrubbing. I think I'll give this horse a blaze. It'll be lower in value, but it will be purple. I like to do that. So now we still have a lot of work to do on the grass in the foreground. Some yellow and white. I bet you can hear those bells. It's one of my wind chimes. Making the large shapes that I painted in the first pass more interesting by the addition of similar values and similar colors to create visual texture that'll give you something to look at. So your eye will actually wander over the surface of the painting and saying, oh, I didn't notice that the first time I saw this. Just want another cowboy over there. I want him to be too important, so I got to be careful. But I do want a second figure in there to give the idea that these riders are together. Now, what did you learn from this? Well, hopefully what you learned from this color system that I'm using is if it's in sunlight, you use your warm palette. If it's in shadow, you use your cool palette. There are some minimal exceptions. For example, that brilliant flash of phthalo green in the actual sun itself. And that backlighting subjects are all about value. That which is in shadow needs to be dark enough so that you have this range of light values to make it actually show up. And that's how you do it. Mostly. Get a little down into middle values over here next to this tail so it'll show up a little better. Again, if you want a backlit subject to really show up, what you got to do is get a middle value up against it if it's not where the sun actually is. And that way, whatever's the rest of it will show up so much better. Now I got to sign it. Okay, signing is usually in a contrasting value. Okay. As I explained in my first video, which is now out of print, signing is not about a ballpoint pen. Your brush, you have to go back 5 or 6 times to get enough paint to do your signature. This next section introduces you to something that was sort of an inspiration on my part. I've designed what I call the time of day color wheel, and you're going to be seeing how it affects every mixture that you make depending upon the time of day that you, the artist, are trying to depict. I want you not to think of this as a color wheel, but I'd rather have you think of it as the time of day. We have dawn over here. This is when the sun comes up. We go up to 10 o'clock. We have high noon, then we have around 2 o'clock, and then we start going towards our evening. And by the time we get all the way to here, we're back at full nightfall after twilight. So if you'll think of this as a day rather than as a wheel that helps you to mix colors, I'm sure that you'll have a clearer understanding of what I'm going to say next. You might want to get a pencil and paper. Here's how it works. When the sun comes up in the morning, we have a yellow light. It's clean, it's clear from overnight stillness, the moisture's in the air, and we use yellow in all of our light sides. Just immediately after dawn, we have a lot of cool yellow even in the lit areas of whatever it is that we choose to paint. Because of the blue of the sky, the yellow and the blue mix together, which creates greenish shadows in the earliest morning times. As the morning progresses, we drop that cool yellow. We use a lot of our regular yellow, which is our warm yellow in our lit areas. We still have our greenish shadows, but they're going towards blue-green. By the time we get to late morning, you will have a blue-green shadow area, and we've dropped the cool yellow off our palette for the light, and now we're starting to use our cadmium orange mixes into anything that's in the sunlit side of whatever it is that we're painting. Even if it's a blue shirt, put a touch of cadmium orange in it and you'll see that it'll read right for it being in the sunlight. The shadows move and move and move more towards our noon light, which is blue shadows. And the reason it's blue is because whatever is underneath an object creating a shadow, let's say my hand is an object, the shadow that's underneath it is blue because we have sky reflected light, sky reflected light, sky reflected light coming in from all 4 sides of the object. Here we've got a beautiful opportunity to use a complementary color scheme, blue in our shadows and orange mixed into whatever is in the lit area. Yes, even your trees that are green. Put a touch of cadmium orange on the sunlit side of those trees and watch them pop off the canvas. So this outer ring represents those color areas that are influenced by the light. The inner ring is all of the shadow areas that you work with throughout the time of day. I hope that helps to understand what we've been saying. Again, morning light, cool yellow to warm yellow, greenish shadows, even a little yellow in those greenish shadows in the morning. And then as we move towards late morning, we have a beautiful turquoise, blue-green mixtures are in your shadow areas. By the time we hit high noon, blue in the shadows. That's your influencing color for all shadows at noontime. We get into the afternoon, we have a phenomenon that happens virtually daily, no matter where you are at any latitude, and that is the air gets dirtier, which means your shadows no longer have the clean color that you saw in the morning. When we get to the afternoon side of the spectrum and the clock continues to march on, we get a lot of particulate in the air. If you're living near a city or any industrialized area or dust areas of farmlands, you're going to get a lot of particulate in the air, and so our shadows get a little bit muddier. You can read a good afternoon light painting if the artist knows what they're doing. That's an important point. Afternoons, we go back to our green. Now the reason we go back to our greenish shadows is because we're pulling down towards the orange of evening light, and one of the primary colors of orange is yellow. So as we move towards the afternoon, we muddy up our shadows. I usually use burnt umber or the cool orange, which is yellow ochre, maybe a touch of the phthalo green as well as we move to the afternoon. See, on this side of the spectrum, in the sunlit side, it's strictly orange. In the morning, we still have some vestiges of that morning yellow light hanging out, and it may be a yellowish orange in our highlight areas. As we move on to our afternoon and we start hitting the 3 o'clock, we start seeing our evening influence. Evening influence is in this range right here where we move almost to pure orange on everything that's in the sunlight. The native color becomes subordinate in evening light and in sunset light. By the time we get down to where the sun is just about ready to disappear, anything in sunlight is a really rich red-orange. Anything is shadow, we start adding the alizarin. Now the reason this happens and we get our muddy shadows and we move to alizarin at night is because we are influenced powerfully by all that junk in the air. You may ask why I have this additional band of color out here on this edge. Well, we don't live in a clean environment, really, and there are some areas of the country and in some latitudes and certain times of the year when you have a lot of stuff in the air. Now, you know that it's the influence on the sunlit side of things can be really, really powerful by the fact of the junk in the air, and so this is a mixture of a little white with burnt sienna moving down to cadmium red light. Remember that the colors that you mix, cool yellow from here, warm yellow, cadmium orange all the way around the top, cadmium orange getting awfully pure in this outer ring, which is the way you mix these colors for your sunlit areas. Now, you use the warm palette. If you have a green thing, of course you mix green from your warm palette, in this case sap green, but if it's green in the early morning light, you're going to add an awful lot of this mix to it. If it's a green in late morning light, you'll add a little bit of yellow but more orange, not a tremendous saturation of orange. If it's noon, you're going to touch that sap green with your cadmium orange, and as you move around towards the late afternoon, by the time you get down here, that sap green is going to be gray in the evening light because of the amount and saturation of orange that you have to add to it to make the sunlit green read right as an evening light painting. Now your shadow areas here, it works exactly the same way. If you have a shadow on a red object in the late morning light, that shadow will be perfectly gray neutral because it'll have so much of its complement mixed into it. Mix red with it and of course you get a gray. Give yourself the opportunity to think about the time of day, outer ring sunlit objects, inner ring shadow objects, and of course we get down here, this is where we do our night paintings. That was all featured in my first DVD on painting morning light and moonlight. And I thought you'd enjoy it. Here we have a backlit set of horses up in Idlewild. Definitely early afternoon. Look at the color of the shadows. They aren't rich enough to be late morning. This is a backlit subject done at Del Mar Racetrack, washing War Emblem, and the backlit blue on that horse, that light is blue, very clear light, late morning. That's when they wash up the horses after their workouts. I want to thank you for joining me again in this DVD journey into color, featuring my colorful oil painting system that has warm and cool families of color. You can always contact me using my email, and I have a wonderful mailing list that you can join, dailypaintings.com, and you can also contact me to be put on an email mailing list for my regular collectors mailing list. Just send me an email at the address you see over here, and I'll be happy to let you know about any upcoming DVDs that are going to be featuring more of my color system. There are some in the works. I've been asked to do a DVD on painting very specific, difficult lighting situations, such as misty mornings, foggy days, and more on the Moonlight series. I wish you all the best in painting, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. Have to get the mindset of an artist and a teacher. Oh, okay. Yes, I do my own camera work. Okay, we're recording over here. Do you think I have enough brushes? See what happens when you like to buy brushes? Coffee! Gotta have the cup of coffee. See the rainbow. Yeah, it's all about color. What I like to call the, what do I like to call it? I forgot. Senior moment. Oh dear. Oh. Oh shoot, I didn't get any of that. I didn't punch. Did I? It says it's recording. Why doesn't, oh, wrong button. I'm running out of tape. Oh no, I'm running out of tape. Stop. I want you to think of this as a cat that just came in and made all that noise. This is my audience. Yep, she's sound asleep. Excuse me. Kitty. This is Pesto. This is my studio cat. I don't get to sit in my chair because she takes it over. Yes, I do all my own camera work. Isn't that scary? This is the German Pinscher, who is our current house resident dog. She sleeps on the other side of my studio, on my other side of my easel. She's deaf, 15 years old.